The thump of the UH-1's rotor hit me in the chest like a heartbeat out of rhythm. The sunset burned red in the western sky, where thin trails of smoke drifted apart slowly. The smell of gunpowder mixed with engine oil and damp earth. I can still remember the sweat running down my back, not from heat but from what waited under the canopy ahead. In that moment, I turned my head and caught the eyes of a young soldier, wide open as if trying to take in every detail while searching for a promise of safety. I brought the war home with me, and it has never left. Back then, I didn't know what I was carrying. I thought I was bringing back a few scars, some old photographs, a couple of medals, and stories to tell in old age. But there was something that wasn't in my rucksack, yet weighed more than any rifle I ever carried. It followed me into my dreams, stayed in my reflection in the mirror, and sometimes I could hear it even in perfect silence. We called it moral injury, but that name feels cold, like it belongs in a medical textbook. To me, it's no different from a wound that will never heal. A physical wound bleeds, burns, and eventually closes. This one doesn't bleed. It just sits there like a stone in my chest, pressing down every time the memories return. My body came back whole, but my soul did not. Moral injury isn't like fear. Fear comes, goes, and comes again. This thing takes root. It grows branches of memory I never invited. Like when I'm sipping coffee in the morning, hearing children laugh, and suddenly the smell of gunpowder rushes in, dragging with it the image of a village I wish I could forget. Or when I walk into church, hear the organ play, and out of nowhere, I see the eyes of someone I couldn't save. We were trained to do the job, not to live with the memory of it. The officers taught us how to keep a rifle clean, how to march, how to shoot fast and true. But no one taught us how to fold away the past and put it on a shelf. No one told us that sometimes doing the right thing by orders could still keep you awake for the rest of your life. I once thought I was stronger than anything the battlefield could throw at me. I was right, until I came home. Because the battlefield can end, but what you carry from it doesn't. People ask me, "Are you haunted by what you saw?" I just smile. Not only by what I saw, but by what I did. And sometimes by what I didn't do. Moral injury is looking in the mirror and not recognizing the person staring back. It's a whisper in your ear reminding you that you crossed a line you once thought untouchable. It's that moment when you ask yourself, if I had made a different choice that day, could I live lighter now? And the answer never comes. Some questions echo for a lifetime and no one will ever answer them. I'm not telling this for pity. I'm telling it because if you've ever worn a uniform in any war, you may have met this thing without knowing its name. And if you've never carried a rifle, maybe you'll understand the veterans who sit quietly in the corner, avoiding eye contact when the past comes calling. My years in Vietnam left me with many things. Brothers in arms, discipline, and moments of beauty no one believes could exist in war. But above all, they left me with one bitter truth, that a man can wound himself without a single bullet being fired. And that's the battle I'm still fighting today. There are nights when the whole house is silent and I find myself back in that moment. When the plane's door closed behind me, the engines roared, and I was leaving Vietnam. Back then I thought it was over. But really, it was only the end of one chapter and the opening of another, a chapter that always pulls me back to the very beginning. And the beginning wasn't the day I set foot on that sweltering tropical soil. It was months earlier, when I was still a young man in America, with no idea how the war was about to rewrite my life. I grew up in a small town where the winter wind could cut your skin and the summer dust stuck to your sweat. Main Street had a few shops, one gas station, and a diner where old men talked baseball over coffee. Life there was quiet, but for an 18-year-old boy, it felt like a stagnant pond. I wanted more. I wanted to see the world, to become someone people would remember. Some of my friends enlisted out of idealism, saying they'd stand up for freedom. Others because of duty, their names pulled in the draft. As for me, I think I wanted to escape that little street as much as I wanted a reason to be proud of myself. In the late 60s, America was a country arguing with itself. Turn on the TV and you'd see anti-war protests flooding college campuses. spliced with footage of soldiers wading through rice paddies in some faraway land. Some called us heroes, others called us killers. But when my draft notice came, all those words felt distant. To me, war was just an abstract idea, a nightly news segment, a propaganda poster. I hadn't yet imagined its smell, its sound, or the price it demanded to pass through it. When I told my mother I was going, she stayed silent for a long time. She didn't cry in front of me, but I knew she would once I left the room. My father just nodded and said it was the road a man must take if he wants to grow up. That line stayed with me through the months that followed. I told myself this was my chance to prove I was more than just a kid from a forgotten town. Training began on a cold March morning. We were shaken awake before sunrise, hundreds of young men standing in formation under the yellow glow of the parade ground lights. At first, it felt like an adventure. I felt like I was becoming part of something bigger than myself. I learned to fold my blanket flat as a board, shine my boots until I could see my own reflection, and run miles without breaking stride. But as the weeks went on, I realized it wasn't just building our bodies, it was sanding down every trace of the person we'd been before. The barking orders, the endless drills, the demand for perfection in every movement, it was all shaping us into machines built to follow commands. Every morning, when I looked into the eyes of the men beside me, I saw both pride and a shadow of uncertainty. We thought we were going to be heroes. No one told us our hands would shake for the rest of our lives. At night in the barracks, I'd sit on my bunk, cleaning my new rifle until the fluorescent light glinted off the barrel. We talked about the places we'd see, the battles we'd win, and the letters we'd send home. Back then, none of us thought about the possibility of not coming back. It was something unspoken, a quiet pact among young men who had never yet looked death in the face. I remember the last morning before leaving the training camp. A light rain fell, drops collecting on the brim of my helmet. We lined up to receive our gear, each item handed over with the rustle of paperwork and a silent nod. Everyone tried to look calm, but in their eyes, there was something like a door closing, about to open into another world. And I knew that once we stepped through, there would be no way back. The flight out of America took longer than I expected. I couldn't tell how many hours I'd slept, or how many times I woke up to the steady growl of the engines and the metallic tang that hung in the cabin. All I remember is the jolt when the wheels hit the runway, the whole plane shuddering, and then that wave of humid air rushing in the moment the door opened. It felt like someone had thrown a wet blanket around me and told me to breathe deep. The smell of earth, jet fuel, and something strange. Later I'd learn it was the scent of the rainforest after rain. All of it poured into my lungs at once. The air was a wall of sound. Rotors still clapping behind us, metal clanging, voices calling over each other, and beneath it all, a dense, constant chorus of insects like a living curtain wrapped around everything. I stepped down, blinking against the sunlight bouncing off wet concrete. The heat seemed to rip through my brand new uniform. Sweat broke out before I'd taken 3 steps. I looked around and saw unfamiliar faces. American soldiers with the road worn into their skin, locals in loose shirts and conical hats moving quickly through the cargo area without meeting our eyes. On the ride from the airstrip to base, I pressed my face to the truck's side rail, trying to swallow every detail. On either side of the road stretched rice paddies, green as paint, children running barefoot along the banks, their laughter rising and fading as we passed. Farther out, thatched huts, water buffalo plodding under the yoke. It all looked peaceful, and yet, it was so foreign that I felt like I was rolling through a painting, unaware of what lay behind its colors. The culture shock came in the smallest things. I couldn't understand a word the villagers said to each other, only a tumble of sharp and lingering syllables that stopped as suddenly as they began. The signs were nothing like home, the letters more like strokes of a brush than anything I'd seen. Street food steamed in metal pots by the roadside, the sharp bite of chili and the thick, salty smell of fish sauce pulling me between curiosity and caution. But woven into that curiosity was a vague, constant fear, a feeling that crept in even when everything looked calm. We were told over and over that the enemy could be anywhere, hidden in the bamboo, beneath the river, even in the smile of someone walking past. A grizzled sergeant's words stayed with me: "No one sees the bullet with their name on it." I knew he meant it. Here, anything could turn in the blink of an eye. That first night on base, I lay on the metal bunk under a slow-turning ceiling fan, the insect chorus never letting up. The smell of gun oil from the armory next door mixed with the damp, earthy scent of the wooden walls. I tried to sleep, but the road we'd driven that afternoon kept playing in my mind, along with the eyes of the villagers, curious, wary. I didn't know what they saw us as, protectors or invaders. And the truth was, I wasn't sure which I was either. The next day, out with my unit, I began to sense the rhythm of life here. Morning brought a heavy fog that clung to the coconut palms, blurring the dirt road ahead. By midday, heat shimmered up from the ground, making the air itself seem to waver. Every sound, a rustle in the leaves, a dog barking in the distance, carried the same question: was it nothing, or was it the start of something waiting for us? I was learning quickly that in Vietnam, the line between safety and danger was thinner than a hair. In daylight, we'd pass through villages where children chased after us, laughing. By night, those same roads echoed with gunfire somewhere beyond the dark. Everything here had two faces, and I was beginning to see the world through a layer of caution I'd never known before. The days in Vietnam quickly pulled me into the rhythm of operations, and getting used to this place was just a thin layer covering the truth that at any moment, everything could fall apart. We were assigned to a jungle patrol. On paper, it was just another mission, but no one could predict what waited beyond those green canopies. That morning, the sky hung heavy with dark gray clouds. The air was thick, damp, and heavy with the smell of earth. We moved in single file, a few steps between each man, eyes constantly scanning. The ground was soft and slick, each step making a wet, sucking sound. My finger rested near the trigger, not on it but close enough that I wouldn't lose a second if something happened. The hum of insects mixed with the crunch of leaves underfoot, until suddenly it stopped. In war, sudden silence is rarely good news. We froze. The sergeant at the front signaled us to keep moving, slower, more cautious. No words, just quick glances between steel helmets. About 50 meters later, gunfire erupted from the left. Dirt and leaves exploded around us. I dropped instantly, pressing myself into the ground, my heart pounding like it wanted out of my chest. The squad returned fire immediately. The sharp stench of gunpowder mixed with wet earth and sweat, burning in my throat. I saw Jackson, right in front of me, trying to crawl to cover when he suddenly froze. A red bloom spread quickly across his back. Instinct drove me and another man forward, dragging Jackson behind a thick tree. His breathing was shallow, his eyes wide, trying to speak but unable. The medic rushed in, pressing hard on the wound. I knew his chances were slipping away fast. In that moment, all the battle noise seemed to fade. All I could hear was Jackson's ragged breathing and the tension in my own hands gripping the rifle. We fired back. Each squeeze of the trigger slammed the stock into my shoulder. I don't remember how many times I pulled the trigger, but I remember every face, friends and fleeting figures on the other side, flashing in the split seconds between life and death. It felt like each shot etched itself into my memory, leaving a mark that would never fade. The firefight ended quicker than I expected. Less than 10 minutes, though it felt like an hour. When the guns finally went silent, we pushed forward. All we found were scattered shell casings, a single rubber sandal, and blood trails leading into the deeper jungle. No one spoke. Everyone knew the fight wasn't truly over. It had just slipped into the shadows, waiting for another chance. We carried Jackson back to base. He died on the way. His death weighed more than any rucksack I'd ever carried. In war, loss isn't just measured in lives. It's measured in the empty space in the formation, in stories left unfinished, and in the quiet stares at the empty chair in the mess hall. That night, I sat alone, cleaning my M16, its barrel scorched from the fight. My hands still trembled, though I couldn't tell if it was from exhaustion or something deeper. I kept replaying that moment of choice, whether to run to Jackson or hold my position to cover the squad. I chose to hold. It was the tactically sound decision, but it left a cut inside me that I know will never heal. In the days that followed, the missions kept coming as if nothing had happened. We still went deeper into the jungle, still walked those wet paths strung tight between life and death. But something in me had shifted. I began to realize that sometimes, the quiet of the jungle worried me more than the gunfire. Because in war, it's what you don't hear that can kill you. The ambush from the day before was still etched deep in my mind, but we didn't have the luxury to rest or dwell on the loss. War doesn't allow anyone to stop for long. The next day, the new orders came, short, cold, and without room for discussion. Move into a small riverside village where intelligence believed an enemy group might be hiding. We set out before daylight. Mist clung to the surface of the water, and the cool of the early morning briefly masked the constant, suffocating heat. On the way, the sergeant repeated over and over that this mission was critical. Eliminate any threat before it could strike our forces. His tone left no space for questions, as if every situation already had a predetermined answer. A few hundred meters from the village, we spread out. The distant hum of helicopter blades faded, replaced by the chorus of insects and the soft slap of water against the riverbank. The village came into view through clusters of nipa palms and tall bamboo. From afar, it looked like any peaceful hamlet we'd passed before. But the stillness here made my stomach tighten. We moved closer. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life with the voice of command. Primary target is the house on the north side of the village. Intelligence believes an enemy officer is inside. If there's any resistance, open fire immediately. I heard "open fire immediately" clearly, but my chest tightened when I spotted a few women and children in the yard, staring toward us. My breathing grew heavier. I glanced at Ramirez walking beside me. His brow was furrowed, his eyes asking, "Are we really going to do this?" I didn't answer, just tightened my grip on the M16. We entered the village, surrounding the designated house. The air smelled faintly of cooking smoke, mingled with damp earth and rotting wood. A door shifted open and I caught a glimpse of movement inside. The radio barked again, no hesitation. Target confirmed. Fire. That moment stretched into forever. I knew there could be enemy fighters inside, but there could also be civilians, people who had nothing to do with this war. My finger rested on the trigger, my heart pounding. In my head, two voices clashed violently. One was duty, the reason I was here. The other was something deeper, a gut feeling that if I pulled the trigger, someone innocent would fall. Ramirez looked at me, then at the door. The radio's voice came again, sharper this time. I swallowed hard. Then someone fired. I don't know whose shot came first, but within seconds the whole squad was shooting. Gunfire cracked like a whip, smoke filled the air. Wood splintered, glass shattered, and screams rose, then were swallowed by the next burst of rounds. When it was over, I could hear crying. We moved in. Inside the dim house, sunlight streamed through bullet holes in the walls, scattering broken patterns across the dirt floor. 3 bodies lay still, a man in civilian clothes and 2 women. A child clung to one of the women's bodies, wailing. I stood frozen, the metallic tang of blood thick in the air, catching in my throat. No one spoke. The commander gave the order to pull out, reporting that the target was neutralized. I glanced back one last time before stepping out. The child's eyes, wide with both terror and grief, burned themselves into my memory. We left the village in silence. No one met each other's gaze. My boots felt heavier with each step, as if I were walking on something that could never be washed off. That night, I lay on my cot under the low, dark ceiling of our tent. The ceiling fan turned in slow, lazy circles, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that house again. The gunfire, the shattering glass, the child's scream. I asked myself, if I had stopped, if I had said, wait, Would it have been different? But war doesn't leave room for what if. The nights that followed were no better. Sleep came in short, broken fragments. I dreamed I was standing in front of that same house, but this time the doorway filled with faces I knew. Jackson, the women from the village, the child. They didn't speak, just stared at me with eyes that asked questions I couldn't answer. I'd wake up soaked in sweat, heart pounding, needing hours to remember that I was still alive. From then on, I began to feel something inside me shift. I still followed orders, still did my job, but part of me was no longer in the fight. I became slower to pull the trigger. Every time I raised my weapon, I saw faces. We survived. But what I brought back wasn't victory. The others didn't talk about it. They drank, they laughed, they told old stories to drown out the day. I tried to join in, but the laughter in my mouth turned to silence. No amount of whiskey was strong enough to erase that image. That feeling, part guilt, part loss, started to follow me like a shadow. It didn't crash into me all at once. It slipped into everything, when I cleaned my rifle, when I ate, when I drifted towards sleep. I didn't have a name for it back then. Now I do. This was the moment the moral injury began to take root inside me. The last days in Vietnam passed with a strange mix of relief and heaviness. I knew the day I would leave this place was coming. Every morning when I woke to the sunlight filtering through the tent's canvas, I told myself just a few more days. But right after, another thought crept in. After everything that's happened, what kind of man am I coming back as? The hope of going home was always there, but it wasn't pure anymore. I wasn't just longing to see my family, my friends, or breathe the familiar air of my hometown. I was hoping to escape the dreams, the memories that clung like a shadow. But I knew leaving Vietnam didn't mean leaving the war. Those days, our unit's operations slowed, mostly guard duty and short patrols. But even without the heavy fighting, the war was everywhere. In the watchful eyes of the men around me, in the sudden chop of helicopter blades tearing the sky, in every casualty list read over the radio from other units. I began noticing the people more. Some familiar faces were gone, replaced by young replacements who didn't yet understand what they'd walked into. A few of the men I'd been with since the start were also about to leave. At night, when we sat around the dim light of a lantern, our conversations drifted away from missions and toward the future, what each man dreamed of doing when he got back. One talked about opening a repair shop. Another about marrying the girl who'd waited for him all this time. I said a few things about my own plans, mostly to keep the laughter going. The truth was, I wasn't sure I could go back to the life I had before. I was afraid the man I'd become here would follow me home. On Ramirez's last day, we shook hands hard. He smiled, told me to keep myself alive until it was my turn. I watched him step onto the helicopter, his helmet tilting slightly under the rotor's blast. As the bird lifted off, I thought about everyone who'd left before him. Some back to America, some staying forever in this land. Not all handshakes are the same. Some mean see you later, and some both men know are goodbye forever. I couldn't tell the difference anymore. Then my day came. I packed my gear. Some uniforms, a few photos, small keepsakes I wasn't sure I even wanted. At the airstrip, I looked around at the faces, both familiar and strange, of men who had fought, who had lost, and who now waited for the flight to take them away from here. The whir of helicopter blades mixed with names called over the loudspeakers. I climbed aboard, finding a seat near the window. As the plane lifted, I looked down at the fields, the winding rivers, the small villages I had passed through during my time here. The landscape slipped away beneath us, but the weight inside me didn't lighten. The flight back to America was longer than any patrol I had ever been on. I didn't sleep the whole way. My eyes stared out the window, but my mind kept drifting back to faces, to shouts, to moments that would never leave me. I knew that when I got home, people would ask me what I'd done, what I'd seen. I wasn't sure I could answer honestly. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because I couldn't find the words to make them understand. When the plane touched down, I heard cheers, applause. But I just sat there. American soil was under my feet, but I didn't feel like I had truly come home. I'd brought too much back from Vietnam, not just memories but invisible scars no one else could see. The day I came home, the sky was clear and blue, not a cloud in sight. A small bus took me from the airport back to town, rolling past familiar roads, the same trees standing where they always had, the same shops open as if nothing had changed. But inside me everything had. People welcomed me with smiles and handshakes. My mother hugged me so tightly I thought she might never let go. My father clapped me on the shoulder, his eyes full of pride and relief. Neighbors gathered, asking questions, sharing news from the months I'd been gone. I smiled, answered, but inside there was a sheet of glass between us. They could see me standing there, but the rest of me was still in Vietnam. That first night, I lay in my old bed, under the faded blanket, breathing in the familiar scent of the wooden frame. But when I closed my eyes, the sound of the ceiling fan wasn't a fan anymore, it was helicopter blades. The barking dog outside became the sound of night patrols, when any noise could signal danger. In the days that followed, I realized you don't leave war just by changing the scenery. A sudden loud noise, someone dropping a pan in the kitchen, could send my heart racing, my body reacting as if I were back in the fight. The smell of wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney pulled me straight into mornings in riverside villages, where cooking fires mixed with damp earth and the scent of gunpowder. I tried to fit back in. I went for beers with old friends, listened to them talk about jobs, relationships, future plans. I laughed and nodded, but sometimes their words slipped past me like a silent movie. They spoke a language I'd forgotten, while the one I'd brought back from the war was one no one understood. It was the same with family. We loved each other, but there was an invisible gap between us. My mother asked about Vietnam, but when I started to tell her, she shook her head. "Don't, son, let it go." My father only said, "You did what you had to do." I knew they thought that was the best way to protect me, but the silence only made me feel more alone. Some nights I sat on the porch, watching the dim glow of the streetlights. A cat darting across the yard could make my heart pound faster than it should. I wondered if I would ever be the man I'd been before. The man who could sleep through the night, hear fireworks without ducking, believe that each new day was just another day. I tried working, but in the office, small sounds could pull me out of the present. The click of a stapler felt like the snap of a safety being released. A truck braking hard on the street sounded like an explosion. I couldn't focus. Coworkers looked at me with puzzled eyes. They didn't know that every sound was a door into memories I'd locked away. I started avoiding crowds, skipping gatherings. I didn't want to pretend I was fine anymore. But at home the silence was too big. And in that silence I could hear the gunfire, the shouting, the chopper blades, as if they had never left me. One afternoon, passing the high school football field, I heard the whistle blow and the roar of the crowd. Suddenly, I was back in the Vietnamese jungle, hearing whistles and urgent shouts from my squad. I had to stop, stand still, breathe deep, remind myself it was just a game. I began to understand that I'd stepped into another war, the war to live among people who had never been to the battlefield. There were no maps, no orders, no squad at my side. Just me with the sights and sounds no one else could see or hear. And no one could fight this one for me. The years after leaving Vietnam taught me that war doesn't end on the day you go home. It follows you through every doorway, sits at your table, and lies beside you in bed every night. At first I thought I just needed time. People say all wounds heal eventually. But there are wounds that don't bleed, and because of that, no one sees them. They sit deep in your chest, slowly eating away at you. I began to lose sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw faces from the past. Buddies, civilians, even people whose names I never knew. Gunfire echoed in my head like a song stuck on repeat. Some nights I woke up shouting, only to realize the voice was my own. Daytime wasn't much better. I avoided eye contact, afraid someone might see something in my eyes, a secret I didn't want to share. I snapped over small things, then spent hours regretting it. Things that once made me happy no longer did. It often felt like I was standing between two worlds. One was filled with people who had never known war, the other existed only in my memory, where gunfire, smoke, and loss were normal. I didn't fully belong to either. For a while, I turned to alcohol. The first drink made it easier to breathe, the second blurred the memories a bit. But by morning, everything came back sharper, heavier. I learned alcohol doesn't erase memories, it only delays their return. The turning point came one winter night. I was sitting alone in a dark room, the bottle almost empty, when a knock came at the door. It was an old friend from the unit, now living a few towns over. He stepped in, looked around, and simply said, "I know what you're going through. I've been there too." We talked all night. No explanations needed, no careful choice of words. He told me about his nightmares, the guilt of surviving, and how he'd found a veteran support group. They met weekly, sharing stories, listening, never judging. I hesitated. Part of me feared that saying things out loud would make them more real. But eventually I went. The first day I stepped into that small room with rows of plastic chairs, I felt like a raw recruit again, uncertain, guarded. Then an older man began telling a story about a decision he'd had to make in battle, and how it had stayed with him for life. I found myself nodding because it wasn't so different from my own. I started talking. At first, just a few short, broken sentences. But week by week, my words grew longer, clearer. I spoke about my days in the war, about what I had done and what I hadn't done. I couldn't erase the past, but I could tell it so it wouldn't swallow me whole. Beyond the group, I began to write. At first, scattered notes, a single memory, an image, a line of dialogue. Later, I organized them into chapters, into a story. Writing let me look back from a safe distance, helped me arrange the fragments into something I could understand. I also learned that sharing my story didn't just help me, it helped others. Some veterans came to me after group meetings to say my words made them feel less alone. Some family members told me they understood their loved ones better after hearing what I had to say. In the years that followed, I still lived with those memories. They didn't disappear. But I learned how not to let them control everything I did. I had nights when I could sleep peacefully, days when I could smile for real. Moral injury isn't like a physical wound you can bandage. It's more like a shadow in the mind, and you have to find a way to light even the smallest corner of it. For me, that light came from telling the story, even when it was hard, even when I had to stop to wipe my eyes. Every time I told it, I took back a piece of myself. If you have ever walked through war, you know it doesn't just live in old photographs or the pages of history books. It lives in your breath, in your dreams, and in the moments you thought you had forgotten. I want to tell you that what you're feeling is not yours alone. The haunting, the guilt, the unanswered questions, they're the baggage many of us carry. They are not a sign of weakness. They are proof that you lived and witnessed something no one should ever have to see. To those who have never been to war but want to understand it, I hope you listen with your heart, not just your ears. Behind every story is a person, not just a soldier but a son, a father, a friend. When we tell our stories, we're not looking for pity. We're trying to preserve a piece of the war's truth, so it won't be twisted or forgotten. One thing I've learned after years of living with moral injury is this: silence only makes the darkness grow. It took me years to realize that when I tell my story, no matter if my voice shakes, no matter if my eyes blur, I'm giving myself a chance to breathe. And every time someone nods and says, "I understand," I know the connection between people is still alive. I encourage anyone carrying an invisible wound to find a safe place to speak. That could be a support group, a trusted friend, or even the blank page of a notebook. Don't wait until the pain becomes a wall between you and the rest of the world. War has taken things we can never get back: time, youth, friends, innocence. But it must not be allowed to take our entire soul. Each time we share our story, we pull back a piece of it. Moral injury doesn't disappear. But when we tell our story, we take back a piece of the soul we lost.